Dr. Lisa Carter floated in her small research station near the edge of the galaxy. Through her window, she could see the dark space between galaxies. It looked empty, but she knew something terrible was coming through that darkness. Her instruments showed strange readings that made no sense according to everything the galaxy scientists thought they knew. The Devourer had sent scouts ahead of its main body. These scouts were smaller but still huge, each one the size of a moon. They moved through space in ways that broke the rules of physics. Sometimes they seemed to be in two places at once. Sometimes they disappeared completely and then showed up somewhere else. The first real battle happened near a Zephyrian colony world. The Zephyrians sent their most powerful mind warriors to fight the Scout. These were beings who could destroy spaceships just by thinking hard at them. They could make enemy soldiers forget how to breathe. They could reach across star systems and crush minds like eggs. Lisa watched the battle through long-distance sensors. The Zephyrian warriors approached the Scout with confidence. They had never met an enemy they could not defeat with mind power. They focused all their mental energy on the Scout and attacked. The Scout absorbed their attack like a sponge absorbs water. Then something horrible happened. The mental energy the Zephyrians had sent out came back to them, but wrong somehow. The most powerful mind warriors in the galaxy started screaming. Their minds were being torn apart by their own reflected power. Within minutes, they were all either dead or completely insane. The Scout then ate the colony world. It did not blow it up or tear it apart. It just made the whole planet disappear, along with the millions of Zephyrians who lived there. Where the world had been, there was nothing but empty space and a strange, dark glow. Lisa felt sick watching this happen. But as a scientist, she forced herself to study the data. There was something very wrong about how the Scout had absorbed and reflected the Zephyrian attack. It was like the creature was designed to eat organized, powerful energy and use it to grow stronger. The Corathans tried next. They sent a fleet of their biggest warships, each one the size of a city and covered with weapons that could crack planets in half. The Corathan warriors inside these ships were the strongest fighters in the galaxy. They had never lost a battle. The warships attacked the Scout with everything they had. Missiles that could destroy mountains exploded against its surface. Energy beams that could melt through any armor hit it again and again. The Corathans roared their battle cries and charged forward with weapons meant for fighting gods. The Scout ate their attacks too. Every missile, every energy beam, every piece of organized military power was absorbed and converted into food. The Scout grew larger and stronger with each attack. Then it reached out with dark tentacles and began pulling the warships apart piece by piece. The mighty Corathan warriors died without even scratching their enemy. Lisa realized something important as she watched her third battle recording. The Scout was not just absorbing energy. It was specifically absorbing organized energy. The more perfect and controlled the attack, the more the Scout seemed to enjoy eating it. The Zephyrian mind attacks were perfectly organized thoughts. The Corathan weapons were perfectly designed military systems. Both had been absorbed completely. She started looking at data differently. Humans had been in a few small fights with pirates and raiders over the years. Lisa pulled up recordings of those battles and studied them carefully. Human tactics were messy and random compared to other species. Human weapons were simple and often broke down. Human battle plans changed constantly during fights as commanders made things up on the spot. To other species, this looked like proof that humans were terrible at war. But Lisa was starting to think it might be exactly what they needed against the Devourer. The creature seemed designed to eat perfection and order. What would it do when faced with chaos and randomness? She called Jake Morrison using the emergency communication system. Jake was surprised to hear from her. Earth scientists rarely contacted the Galactic Council directly. But when Lisa explained her theory, Jake listened carefully. The idea was simple, but frightening. The galaxy's greatest strength was also its greatest weakness against this enemy. Every species had evolved to be perfect at one thing. The Zephyrians were perfect mind warriors. The Corathans were perfect physical fighters. The Velani were perfect energy manipulators. The Nexari were perfect thinkers. The Asthan were perfect time controllers. But humans were not perfect at anything. They were okay at many things, but great at nothing. This had always made them seem weak and useless. Now Lisa thought it might make them impossible for the Devourer to digest properly. Jake brought Lisa's idea to the next council meeting. The big species were in full panic mode now. More scouts had arrived and were eating whole solar systems. The Velani had tried to fight them by breaking their molecules apart, but the scouts had absorbed that attack too. The Nexari had calculated perfect battle strategies, but perfect strategies were exactly what the scouts ate best. The Asthan had tried to trap scouts in slow time, but the creatures existed partially outside normal time anyway. When Jake presented Lisa's theory, the council members were not impressed. A Zephyrian sent dismissive thoughts into everyone's mind. A Korathan laughed so hard the floor shook. A Velani flashed colors that meant they thought the idea was stupid. The Nexari showed calculations proving humans could not possibly help. The Asthan said nothing, but their silence felt like rejection. However, Admiral Ben Rodriguez was listening from the back of the room. He was the highest-ranking human in the Galactic Defense Force, but his rank was very low. He mostly handled supply shipments and maintenance schedules. The other species would never let a human command real warships or plan real battles. Ben had been thinking the same thoughts as Lisa. He had spent years watching how other species fought, and he had noticed that they all fought the same way. Their minds worked. Organized, perfect, predictable. Human soldiers were different. They improvised, adapted, and did unexpected things when plans went wrong. After the meeting, Ben approached Jake and Lisa with a proposal. The council would never officially approve a human military operation, but they might approve a test mission using expendable ships and crews. If Ben could volunteer for a suicide mission against one of the scouts, he might get permission to try Lisa's theory. Jake was horrified at the idea of sending humans to die just to test a theory, but Lisa pointed out that everyone was going to die anyway if they could not find a way to fight the Devourer. The main body of the creature was much larger than the scouts, and it would arrive in less than a year now. Ben started putting together a small fleet of volunteers. He could not use real military ships because humans were not allowed to have them. Instead, he gathered cargo haulers, mining ships, and exploration vessels. The crews were humans who had been working in the most dangerous and unimportant jobs in the galaxy. They were used to making broken things work and surviving in impossible situations. Captain Amy Foster joined first. She flew cargo ships through asteroid fields that other pilots said were impossible to navigate. Chief Engineer Pete Williams came next. He was famous for fixing machines with spare parts and pure stubbornness. Dr. Sam Turner volunteered as their medical officer. He had learned to treat injuries with whatever materials he could find, often saving lives when proper medical equipment was not available. The council approved Ben's request, but only because they saw it as a way to get rid of some useless humans while gathering intelligence about the enemy. They gave him 6 old cargo ships and told him not to expect any support. If his mission failed, no one would come to rescue him. Ben looked at his small fleet and smiled. The ships were old and patched together. The weapons were simple and would probably break after a few shots. The crews were misfits and outcasts who had never been trusted with anything important. By every measure the galaxy used to judge military strength, his force was completely worthless. But Ben had a feeling that being worthless might be exactly what they needed to be. Jake Morrison walked down the long hallway of the Galactic Council building. His shoes made soft sounds on the metal floor. The walls were tall and made of some kind of blue crystal that glowed with its own light. He had been walking these halls for 20 years now, but they still made him feel small. Everything here was built for beings much larger than humans. The other species in the galaxy were nothing like humans. The Zephyrians could read minds and move things without touching them. They looked like tall gray beings with big heads and eyes that seemed to see right through you. When they spoke, their voices went right into your head without making any sound. Jake had learned not to think too hard around them, because they would know what he was thinking. The Korathans were giants made of metal and flesh. They stood 12 feet tall and their skin looked like armor plates. Their hands could crush steel like paper. Jake had seen one of them pick up a small spaceship just to move it out of the way. They spoke in deep voices that made the ground shake. Most of them looked at humans like they were looking at insects. The Veilani were the strangest of all. They were made of pure energy and could change their shape at will. Sometimes they looked like balls of light, sometimes like flowing water made of stars. They could break things apart and put them back together in seconds. Jake had once watched a Veilani take a broken machine and fix it by touching it with one finger. The machine became better than new. The Nexari were living computers made of crystal and metal. They thought faster than any computer humans had ever built. They could solve problems in seconds that would take human scientists years to figure out. When they talked, numbers and equations floated in the air around them. They rarely talked to humans because they said humans thought too slowly to have real conversations. The Asthan were the oldest and most feared. They looked like tall shadows, wearing robes that seemed to be made of night itself. They could slow down time or speed it up in small areas around them. Jake had seen an Asthan stop a falling cup in midair, fix it, and then let time move again. The cup never hit the ground. They spoke in whispers that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Humans were called Category 9 beings. This was the lowest rank in the galaxy. Category 1 beings were gods. Category 9 beings were barely smart enough to count as people at all. The Council had put humans in this group because they could not do any of the amazing things the other species could do. Humans could not read minds, lift spaceships, control energy, think super fast, or control time. Humans were just humans. Jake reached the main council chamber. The room was huge, with seats arranged in a circle. Each seat was made for a different kind of being. The Zephyrian seats floated in the air. The Karathan seats were made of thick metal. The Veilani did not need seats at all. The Nexari seats were covered in glowing screens. The Asthan seats seemed to be made of solid shadow. The human seat was small and plain. It was made of simple metal and painted white. It looked like a child's chair next to all the others. Jake sat down and waited for the meeting to start. He had been coming to these meetings for so long that he knew what would happen. The big species would talk about important things. They would make decisions about the galaxy. Then they would tell the smaller species what jobs they had to do. Humans got the worst jobs. They cleaned up garbage from space stations. They dug for metals on dead planets where nothing could live. They fixed broken machines that no one else wanted to touch. They were never allowed to be soldiers or scientists or leaders. The council said humans were too weak and too stupid for important work. Jake knew this was not fair, but there was nothing he could do about it. Humans had only been part of the galactic community for 50 years. Earth was still a small, weak planet compared to the great worlds of the other species. The human military had a few old spaceships and simple weapons. The human scientists were still learning things that other species had known for thousands of years. The meeting started. When a Zephyrian sent thoughts into everyone's head, Jake felt the familiar cold feeling as the alien mind touched his. The Zephyrian was telling everyone about danger coming from outside the galaxy. Something big and terrible was heading their way. They called it the Devourer. Jake listened as the different species talked about what they knew. The thing coming toward them was huge, bigger than a solar system. It had destroyed entire galaxies before. It ate everything in its path, stars, planets, and all living things. The smart Nexari had calculated that it would reach their galaxy in 18 months. The council members were scared. Jake could tell, even though most of them tried to hide it. The Zephyrians were sending out worried thoughts. The Korathans were making angry growling sounds. The Veilani flickered and changed colors quickly. The Nexari showed frightening numbers on their screens. The Asthan sat in complete silence, which was somehow worse than any other reaction. Each species began talking about how they would fight this devourer. The Zephyrians would try to attack it with mind power. The Korathans would send their strongest, warriors and biggest weapons. The Veilani would try to break it apart at the smallest level. The Nexari would calculate the perfect way to defeat it. The Asthan would try to trap it in slowed time. No one asked what humans would do. No one even looked at Jake during these discussions. Humans were too weak to help with something this important. They would probably just hide on their little planet and hope the stronger species could save them. But Jake was thinking about something else. He was thinking about all the times in human history when weak people had beaten strong people. He was thinking about how humans always found ways to survive, when things looked hopeless. He was thinking that maybe being weak was not always a bad thing. The meeting ended with the council deciding to prepare their defenses. Each species would do what they did best. The humans were told to keep doing their simple jobs and stay out of the way. Jake walked back down the long hallway, but this time he was thinking hard about the future. Something told him that this fight would be different from anything the galaxy had ever seen before. Admiral Ben Rodriguez stood on the bridge of his flagship, a converted cargo hauler called the Lucky Strike. The ship had been carrying grain between farm worlds until 3 weeks ago. Now it was loaded with missiles that Pete Williams had built, from mining explosives and spare parts. The weapons looked dangerous, mostly to the people firing them. Ben's small fleet approached the edge of the Kepler system, where a devourer scout was slowly eating the fourth planet. The creature was the size of Earth's moon and covered in dark tentacles that reached out to pull chunks of rock and metal into its mouth. Each bite made it a little bigger and a little hungrier. The other species had tried to evacuate the system, but their perfectly organized evacuation fleets had been absorbed along with the refugees they were trying to save. The scout seemed to enjoy eating organized rescue operations even more than it enjoyed eating planets. Captain Amy Foster was flying the second ship, a modified asteroid miner called the Stubborn Mule. She had welded armor plates to its hull using metal from a junkyard. Her weapons were mining lasers that she had overcharged until they were bright enough to blind anyone who looked at them directly. The ship looked like it had been built by someone who had never seen a real warship before. Pete Williams was aboard, the third ship, the Jury Rigger. It had been 3 different ships before Pete took them apart and put them back together in new ways. No engineer from any other species could figure out how it stayed in one piece. Pete was not sure either, but it kept flying and that was good enough for him. Dr. Sam Turner commanded the medical ship, a converted passenger liner called the Second Chance. Half of it was filled with medical supplies he had scrounged from dozens of worlds. The other half was filled with spare parts for the other ships. Sam figured they would need both before this was over. The remaining 2 ships were crewed by humans, who had volunteered for what everyone assumed was a suicide mission. Nobody expected them to survive their first encounter with a devourer scout. The best anyone hoped for was that they might learn something useful before they died. Ben watched the scout through his sensors as they approached. It moved in patterns that made no sense. Sometimes it rotated clockwise, sometimes counterclockwise, sometimes it flipped end over end. There was no rhythm or logic to its movements. It was like watching a drunk giant dance in space. Other species had tried to predict the scout's movements using advanced computers and mathematical models. They had failed because they were looking for patterns and logic. Ben realized that maybe the scout moved randomly on purpose. Maybe unpredictability was part of how it stayed alive. If that was true, then Ben's chaotic little fleet might have a chance after all. He opened communication channels to all his ships. Instead of giving detailed battle plans like other commanders, he just said 3 words: make it up. Every human captain understood immediately. They were going to improvise their way through this battle, changing tactics faster than the enemy could adapt. Amy Foster attacked first, but not in any way a military academy would teach. Instead of approaching in a straight line with weapons, ready, she came in spinning like a broken gyroscope while firing mining lasers in random directions. Most of her shots missed the scout completely, but a few hit it at angles no one had tried before. The scout tried to absorb her attack, but the chaotic energy patterns confused it. The creature was designed to eat organized military strikes, not wild flailing from a crazy cargo pilot. Some of Amy's laser blasts bounced off harmlessly, but others seemed to cause actual damage. Dark liquid leaked from several small wounds on the scout's surface. Pete Williams attacked next from the opposite direction. His ship was falling apart as he flew it, dropping pieces of hull plating and trailing sparks from overloaded electrical systems. He fired missiles that had been built from different types of explosives mixed together randomly. Some missiles exploded early, some exploded late, and some did not explode at all but just bounced off the scout like rubber balls. The scout tried to catch Pete's ship with its tentacles, but the jury rigger was too unpredictable. Pete was flying by instinct and desperation, dodging in ways that made no sense even to him. His ship should have been caught a dozen times, but somehow it kept slipping away at the last second. Ben coordinated the attack by shouting suggestions and encouragement over the radio. "Try shooting at that weird bump thing. Amy, see if you can ram those tentacles. Pete, your ship is on fire, but keep going anyway." It was nothing like the precise military communication other species used, but somehow it worked. The scout was getting confused. It had absorbed perfectly organized attacks from the galaxy's greatest warriors without any trouble. But these humans were attacking in ways that had no organization at all. Their weapons were different on every shot. Their flight patterns changed constantly. Their communication was full of jokes and random observations that had nothing to do with tactics. Dr. Sam Turner was supposed to stay back and provide medical support, but he saw an opportunity and took it. He flew his medical ship straight at the scout's mouth. But instead of attacking with weapons, he started dumping medical supplies into space. Bandages, medicines, surgical tools, and emergency rations scattered around the battlefield in a huge cloud of random debris. The scout tried to eat this new attack, but medical supplies were not organized military hardware. They were just useful, things mixed together without any plan. The creature choked on them like a person trying to swallow a handful of random objects. While the scout was distracted, Ben made his move. He flew the Lucky Strike directly into the cloud of medical debris and started firing Pete's homemade missiles. But instead of aiming at the scout, he aimed at the floating medical supplies. The explosions created a chain reaction that turned the whole area into a storm of unpredictable energy and flying objects. The scout was trapped in the middle of this chaos. Every time it tried to absorb one part of the attack, 3 other parts hit it from different angles. The creature began making sounds that no one had heard before, high-pitched wails that seemed to come from pain or confusion. Amy Foster saw her chance and took it. She aimed her mining lasers at the spots where dark liquid was leaking from the scout and focused all her power into those wounds. The overcharged beams cut deeper than anyone expected, causing more dark liquid to spray out into space. Pete Williams followed up by ramming the jury rigger directly into the largest wound. His ship was already falling apart, so the collision just finished the job. But as his ship broke up, all its randomly mixed explosive charges went off at once inside the scout's body. The scout convulsed and made a sound like a dying whale. More tentacles reached out to grab Pete's escape pod. But Sam Turner was already there in the second chance to pull him to safety. Sam flew his medical ship like Amy had taught him, spinning and dodging in ways that made the scout's tentacles miss by inches. Ben coordinated the final attack by getting all his remaining ships to fire at the same wound at the same time. But even this coordinated strike was chaotic because each ship was using different weapons, fired by different people with different ideas about timing. The combined attack hit the scout like a musical chord played by a band that had never practiced. Together, the scout made one last sound and then began to collapse in on itself. The dark tentacles withered and fell away. The massive body started breaking apart into smaller pieces that dissolved into nothing. Within minutes, the creature that had eaten entire worlds was gone. Ben's fleet had won the first victory against a devourer scout. But more importantly, they had proven that Lisa's theory was correct. The creatures could be hurt by chaos and unpredictability. They could be killed by attacks that made no sense and had no organization. Back at the Galactic, Council emergency meetings were called to discuss this impossible victory. The greatest military minds in the galaxy could not understand how a handful of humans in broken ships had succeeded where their perfect fleets had failed, but they could not argue with the results. Jake Morrison found himself in the strange position of being asked for advice instead of being ignored. The council wanted to know how humans had developed such effective tactics. Jake tried to explain that they had not developed anything at all. Chaos and improvisation were not tactics humans had learned. They were just the way humans naturally approached problems when everything was going wrong. For the first time in 50 years, the council began to seriously consider that maybe humans had something valuable to offer after all. Dr. Lisa Carter stood in a laboratory that had been built inside an asteroid. Around her, beings from every major species in the galaxy were trying to learn how to think like humans. The results were both fascinating and terrifying to watch. Zephyrian named Velthara was attempting to send random thoughts instead of organized mental commands. For millions of years, his species had perfected the art of precise telepathic communication. Now he was trying to think about 17 different things at once while singing an old Earth song he had learned from a human engineer. His large gray head was turning purple from the effort, and small objects around the room were floating randomly as his confused mind power leaked out in all directions. Nearby, a Korathan warrior called Gresh Modo was practicing with improvised weapons. Instead of his usual perfectly balanced sword that had been forged by master craftsmen, he was trying to fight with a broken pipe, a cooking pot, and a handful of bolts that Pete Williams had given him. The 12-foot-tall alien looked ridiculous swinging kitchen utensils, but he was starting to move in ways that even he could not predict. His attacks were becoming genuinely unpredictable for the first time in his life. 3 Velani energy. Beings were attempting to create imperfect molecular structures on purpose. This went against everything their species believed about the proper order of matter, but they were learning that intentional flaws could be stronger than perfect crystals. Their forms flickered with uncertainty as they forced themselves to make mistakes that hurt their minds to even consider. The most impressive student was a Nexari named Unit 7745. As a living computer, it had been programmed to always find the most efficient solution to any problem. Now it was learning to deliberately choose bad solutions and see what happened. Numbers and equations floated around its crystal body, but instead of perfect mathematical harmony, they showed chaos theory and random probability curves. The other Nexari had declared Unit 7745 insane, but its new chaotic calculations were producing results that made perfect sense in unpredictable ways. Even one of the mysterious Asthan had joined the training program. The shadow-robed being called itself Whisper of Ages, and it was trying to learn how to make time flow irregularly instead of in smooth, controlled patterns. Around its dark form, time moved in stutters and jumps, speeding up and slowing down, randomly. It was like watching someone learn to dance badly on purpose after spending eternity performing perfect ballet. Admiral Ben Rodriguez moved between the training groups, offering advice that made no sense to anyone except humans. Try doing the wrong thing at the right time, he told Velthara. Hit it with something that should not work, he suggested to Gresh Modo. Make it worse before you make it better, he advised the Velani. The alien students were frustrated and confused, but they were learning. More importantly, they were starting to understand why humans could survive in situations that would kill members of more advanced species. When everything was going wrong and all the perfect solutions had failed, humans just kept trying random things until something worked. It was not elegant or efficient, but it was surprisingly effective. Kate Morgan was teaching communication techniques that horrified military commanders from other species. Instead of precise formal battle language, she was showing mixed crews how to coordinate using jokes, random observations, and emotional outbursts. A typical human battle communication might include tactical information mixed with comments about someone's breakfast, complaints about broken equipment, and spontaneous singing. To alien military minds, this looked like complete chaos. But Kate was showing them that chaos could carry more information than formal protocols. When a human pilot said, "My engine sounds like my Uncle Bob after too much beer," everyone who knew that pilot would understand exactly what kind of engine trouble he was having and how serious it was. The emotional context and personal references contained precise technical data disguised as casual conversation. Dr. Sam Turner was having the most success with his medical training program. His approach to emergency medicine was completely different from the advanced medical systems used by other species. While alien medical technology was precise and automated, Sam's methods were based on creativity and adaptation. He taught doctors from other species how to save lives using whatever materials they could find, even if those materials were not designed for medical use. A Velani healer named Brightstream had learned to use its energy manipulation abilities in chaotic patterns that somehow promoted healing better than precise medical procedures. Instead of following perfect treatment protocols, Brightstream was learning to feel what each patient needed and improvise treatments that were different every time. The breakthrough came when mixed crews started working together on actual missions. A joint human Corathan patrol encountered a Devourer scout near a mining colony. Instead of following standard military procedures, the mixed crew used their new chaotic training to coordinate an attack that confused both the enemy and themselves. The Corathan warriors charged the scout while screaming random Earth song lyrics they had learned from their human teammates. The humans provided covering fire while making jokes about the Corathan singing voices. The combined attack was so absurd and unpredictable that the scout had no idea how to respond. It tried to absorb the organized parts of the attack and ignore the chaotic parts, but the organized and chaotic elements were so mixed together that the creature could not separate them. The scout was destroyed in less than 10 minutes, compared to the hours or days it usually took conventional forces to defeat one. More importantly, none of the mixed crew was killed or seriously injured. The chaotic tactics had not only been effective, but they had also been safer than conventional military approaches. Word of these successes spread quickly through the galaxy. More species volunteered for human-style training programs. Military. Commanders who had spent their entire careers perfecting organized battle tactics began asking humans to teach them how to fight badly on purpose. The most surprising development was that many alien soldiers began to enjoy chaotic tactics more than their traditional methods. Greshmodo discovered that improvised fighting was actually more fun than following perfect sword techniques he had practiced for decades. Velthara found that random telepathic communication felt more alive and personal than the formal mental protocols his species normally used. But the real test was coming. Long-range sensors showed that the main body of the Devourer had entered the galaxy's outer edge. The creature was enormous beyond imagination, larger than entire solar systems. It was not just one being, but millions of scouts and tendrils connected to a central intelligence that had consumed hundreds of galaxies. The conventional fleets of the major species had already been destroyed or absorbed. Only the mixed crews trained in human chaos tactics remained to defend the galaxy's core worlds. Everyone knew that this final battle would determine whether any intelligent life would survive in their galaxy. Jake Morrison received reports from all over the galaxy about these mixed crews and their impossible victories against scout forces. For the first time since he had become Earth's ambassador, alien leaders were asking for his advice instead of dismissing him. The mighty Galactic Council was turning to the weakest species for salvation, but Jake knew that the real battle was just beginning. The main Devourer was not just bigger than its scouts. It was smarter and more adaptable. It had learned from every galaxy it had consumed, incorporating the knowledge and abilities of countless dead civilizations. The chaotic tactics that worked against scouts might not be enough against something that had eaten gods and absorbed the wisdom of entire species. The galaxy needed something more than chaos. It needed the one thing that humans possessed that no other species had ever truly understood. It needed the ability to sacrifice everything for others, even for strangers and former enemies. Jake realized that the final battle would not be won by superior tactics or weapons. It would be won by beings who were willing to give up their own lives so that others could live. The question was whether the other species could learn this most human of traits in time to save themselves. The main body of the Devourer filled the space around the galactic core like a living shadow. It was so large that it had its own gravity, bending light and warping space around itself. Millions of dark tentacles reached out from its central mass, each one the size of a planet. Where they touched star systems, entire worlds disappeared without a trace. Admiral Ben Rodriguez stood on the bridge of his new flagship, a ship that had been built using the combined technologies of every species in the galaxy. The vessel was called the Unity, and it looked like no ship that had ever been constructed before. Parts of it were made from Corathan battle steel. Other sections glowed with Velani energy matrices. Zephyrian mind control crystals were built into the navigation systems. Nexari computers calculated flight paths while Asthan time manipulation devices allowed the ship to exist in multiple moments at once. But the most important part of the ship was that it had been designed by humans. Every system was built to break down and be repaired in creative ways. Every weapon was designed to be modified during battle. Every section could be cut off from the others if necessary. The Unity was built to be imperfect on purpose, because imperfection was the only thing the Devourer could not digest. Around the Unity flew the strangest fleet in galactic history. Hundreds of ships crewed by mixed teams of every species, all trained in human chaos tactics. Korathan warriors flew, next to Velani energy beings. Zephyrian telepaths coordinated with Nexari computers. Asthan time masters worked alongside human engineers who kept their impossible machines running with spare parts and determination. Ben opened a communication channel to the entire fleet. His words were heard by beings from every corner of the galaxy, all of them united for the first time in history. "We are going to die today," he said in his calm, matter-of-fact voice. "All of us. The Devourer is too big and too hungry for us to defeat with weapons. But dying is not the same as losing. We can choose how we die, and that choice will determine whether anyone else gets to live." In the past, such words would have caused panic and retreat among the alien forces. The concept of willing sacrifice for strangers was foreign to most species. But months of training with humans had changed them. Greshmodo, the Korathan warrior, raised his improvised weapons and roared his agreement. Velthera, the Zephyrian telepath, sent out thoughts of determination mixed with fear and acceptance. Brightstream, the Velani healer, flickered with colors that meant courage in the face of certain death. The battle began when the Devourer noticed the approaching fleet and sent out thousands of scout creatures to absorb them. But these scouts encountered something they had never faced before. The attacking fleet was not organized in any recognizable pattern. Ships flew in random formations that changed constantly. Some vessels attacked alone, others attacked in small groups, and a few seemed to be attacking their own allies by mistake. The Devourer's scouts tried to absorb these chaotic attacks, but the fleet was too unpredictable. Human pilots flew their ships in ways that made no sense even to themselves. Korathan warriors threw their weapons at enemies they could not reach, and then picked up new weapons they found floating in space. Velani beings created energy constructs that served no purpose except to confuse the enemy. But the chaos was just the beginning. As the battle continued, something unprecedented happened. When human ships were damaged beyond repair, other species risked their own lives to rescue the crews. When alien vessels ran out of ammunition, humans shared their own weapons even though it left them defenseless. Enemies who had fought each other for centuries were now dying to save each other's lives. The Devourer began to realize that it was facing something completely new. Every galaxy it had consumed before had been inhabited by species that cared primarily about their own survival. Even when they worked together, they did so for mutual benefit. But these beings were throwing their lives away for strangers with no hope of reward or survival. Captain Amy Foster made the first deliberate sacrifice. Her ship was caught by one of the Devourer's massive tentacles and was being dragged toward the creature's mouth. Instead of trying to escape, she flew her ship deeper into the tentacle while overloading her reactor. The explosion tore a hole in the Devourer's limb and freed 3 alien ships that had also been caught. Amy died in the explosion, but she died knowing that 12 other beings would live because of her choice. Her sacrifice inspired others. Pete Williams crashed his engineering ship into a cluster of scouts, destroying himself and them to protect a hospital ship full of wounded aliens. Dr. Sam Turner flew his medical vessel directly into the Devourer's mouth to deliver a cargo of explosive medical supplies, dying with a joke on his lips about the galaxy's most expensive prescription. The Devourer began to change. For billions of years, it had absorbed the organized thoughts and energies of countless civilizations. It had grown fat on the predictable patterns of advanced species. But now it was consuming something that made no sense to its ancient intelligence. Why would weak beings sacrifice themselves for strong ones? Why would prey animals die to save predators? Why would individuals choose the survival of others over their own? These concepts were poison to a creature that had evolved to consume selfishness and order. The Devourer began to convulse and change as the alien ideas of sacrifice and chaos infected its consciousness. Its tentacles writhed in confusion. Its mouth gaped open in what might have been pain or bewilderment. Ben Rodriguez realized that the moment had come for the final gambit. He ordered all remaining ships to fly directly into the Devourer's central mass. Not to attack it, but to be absorbed by it. The plan was insane, but it was also perfectly human. They would defeat the creature by letting it eat them, knowing that they carried something inside them that would destroy it from within. Hundreds of ships flew into the Devourer's mouth like a swarm of suicidal insects. The creature eagerly absorbed them, expecting to gain their energy and knowledge. But instead of organized military power, it consumed pure chaos mixed with pure love. Warriors who cared more about protecting others than killing enemies. Scientists who shared their knowledge freely with former enemies. Engineers who built impossible machines that worked through hope and stubbornness rather than proper design. The Devourer tried to digest these new experiences, but they made no sense within its ancient understanding of how intelligent life worked. The creature had consumed countless species that fought to survive, but never any that fought to let others survive. It had absorbed civilizations that prized order and efficiency, but never any that found strength in chaos and imperfection. The final moment came when Ben Rodriguez flew the Unity directly into the Devourer's core consciousness. As his ship was torn apart by forces beyond imagination, he sent out one last message to whatever remained of his fleet. We did not lose. We taught the galaxy how to win by losing everything. The Unity exploded inside the Devourer's central mind, but the explosion was not made of fire or energy. It was made of every memory of sacrifice and chaos that the creature had absorbed. Every human who had died for strangers. Every alien who had learned to choose others over themselves. Every act of love disguised as an act of war. The Devourer's ancient consciousness could not process these contradictory concepts. A being that existed to consume and grow was being consumed by the idea of giving and sacrifice. A creature that fed on order and predictability was being poisoned by chaos and creativity. For the first time in its existence across countless galaxies, the Devourer experienced something it had never known, the desire to create rather than destroy. The change was not instant, but it was irreversible. The Devourer's massive form began to shift and flow. Instead of dark tentacles that absorbed matter, it grew appendages that scattered seeds of new life. Instead of consuming star systems, it began to create them. The creature that had been the galaxy's greatest destroyer became its greatest creator, building new worlds and nurturing new forms of life. Jake Morrison received the reports from the few ships that had survived the battle. The Devourer was gone, replaced by something that called itself the Gardener. It was traveling back along the path of destruction it had carved across the universe, bringing life to the empty spaces where galaxies had once existed. The Galactic Council met one final time in its old form. The representatives of the major species gathered to formally dissolve the hierarchy that had ruled their galaxy for millions of years. In its place, they established something that had never existed before, a true democracy where every species, no matter how weak or strong, had an equal voice in governing their shared future. Jake stood to address the council for the last time as Earth's representative to an organization that would no longer exist after today. We learned something important in this war, he said. We learned that weakness shared becomes strength, and that the greatest power comes not from what we can destroy, but from what we are willing to sacrifice to protect others. The humans were never the weakest species in the galaxy. We were just the first species to understand that being weak is not the same as being powerless. In the months that followed, the galaxy changed in ways that no one had imagined possible.